Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm David Lavin, the founder of the Lavin Agency, the world's largest intellectual talent agency, and I'm pleased that you could all join us today. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media platform to receive information about upcoming events, and tell your friends and colleagues that they should be here too. As always, we love questions from the audience, and when you think of a question, just put it in now. Don't wait till the end. We're going to go through them on an ad hoc basis. And also, you might have a great question now, and you might even have another great question in a few minutes. So we want them all. Our guest today is on every list of the top retail consultants in the world. He's done extensive original research on the business of retail and the psychology of consumers. Much of this research has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fortune, and Fast Company. And of course, in his global bestsellers, The Retail Revival, Reengineering Retail, and most recently, Resurrecting Retail, The Future of Business in a Post-Pandemic World. Please welcome Doug Stephens.
Thank you, David. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to see you again.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the question that is on everyone's mind, the issue that's on everyone's mind. Retail has been the most disrupted industry over the past 10 plus years. Now AI is here to change everything all over again. Or is it? What's the hype cycle on AI?
So the interesting thing is, in 2014, I came across an interesting little clip of video, which I started showing in presentations. And it was a demonstration that was given at a conference. I think it was Microsoft that was doing the demonstration, but they were debuting a piece of technology that was a collaboration between Microsoft, a company called Soul Machines, and there was actually some influence from the makers of Avatar in kind of collaborating on putting together an AI that had human features. So it was conversational, it looked like a person, and this demonstration took place whereby this guy was on stage having a conversation with this AI and asking it questions like, I'm thinking about getting a new credit card. What kind of credit card should I get? And the AI started asking him a series of questions, and they went back and forth, and eventually it delivered some recommendations. And at the time, I sort of polled the audience and said, how many of you find that really disconcerting or, uncomfortable? Most of the hands in the audience went up. I shared my belief at the time that, I think this is the future. This is the future of how we're going to compute. I think all of us are going to, at some point in time, have our own individual AI that is ours, and we take it with us wherever we go. We can give it whatever form we like. We can converse. And this is before the movie, remember the movie with Joaquin Phoenix? Was it Her or...
Oh, yeah.
She came out. And I think people felt that was a really dystopian sort of view of the future, that we would have this kind of personal assistant with us at all times and conversing with it. Here we are, right? 10 years or 9 years later. So this isn't new. What we're talking about isn't new. But I do think that ChatGPT, by its form and its the fact that it is now something that you don't need to be technical to understand, it's a very user-friendly format, has sort of re-energized now the conversation around AI, and particularly moving us more towards what we would call general artificial intelligence, not sort of the narrow chatbots that we've all been talking to on the phone with our cable provider for the last 20 or 30 years. So it's a new era. I think in terms of where are we on that cycle right now, it seems to me we're kind of in the gee whiz phase. Like, isn't this cool? Look what I can do. We were talking earlier today about, it made a contract for me, or it created a shopping list, or it helped me close my house sale, or whatever the case may be. But all of those things kind of move us up what we call the peak of inflated expectations, right? So Right now, I think people are beginning to feel like, wow, this is, going to be able to do everything for me in my life, and it'll be so accurate and so, so great. We will get to a point, and I think we're maybe bumping up against it now, where we start to see some of the potential downsides of the technology as it exists today. So that leads us to what we call the trough of disillusionment, right? Where all of a sudden we start to think, well, maybe this isn't as good as we thought it was. And maybe it's not as user-friendly. And maybe it makes more mistakes than we thought it would and causes more problems. So I think we're kind of between those two states right now, where we're going to start to see real earnest development and application will be on the other side of that trough of disillusionment. What generally happens with technology is once we get through sort of the disappointment phase, that's when the real work begins. And that's where we're going to start to see really useful products and applications start to come out and be actually implemented across industries. No. So maybe 5 years away from that new sort of threshold of development.
I see. It's a good point that AI has been around for at least 10 years. It does our suggestions on Netflix and Amazon, but we don't realize necessarily that it's AI. What's changed now is it's ubiquitous. Right. It's that we have access to AI. It's not just something that multi-million-dollar companies can manage.
Right.
So now that it's going to be, if it is ubiquitous, then what kind of applications are we going to see for retailers and for consumers?
So it's literally applicable across the entire supply chain and value chain in retail. If we just start from the production end, how does a manufacturer know precisely what to produce, how much of it to produce, when to produce it, where to source raw materials so that it's most efficient from a cost standpoint, which of their customers should be in the priority line in terms of who gets those orders first? There's a tremendous number of complex questions that have to be answered in order to be efficient. So AI is absolutely now going to be able to be implemented in such a way that these enormous amounts of data and considerations can be digested and cogent recommendations made. When we get down to logistics and warehousing, I was just talking to a group the other day when we were talking about just the very fact that in the United States, you have about 10 million warehouse workers. And if you want to find the financial incentive in something, find the risk, right? And you'll find the incentive. So 10 million warehouse workers in the United States making approximately $36,000 a year on average per worker. So we're talking about $360 billion worth of wages. Add to that $168 billion in lost time injuries in warehouses. Now you start to think about the potential implementation of robotics that is infused with AI, right? And so companies like Boston Dynamics are doing remarkable things with robots that are stronger, faster, far more efficient than human beings at doing these repetitive and dangerous tasks. Infuse those robots now with AI so that they have a degree of intelligence, can begin making decisions about how that work gets done. And you're talking about the potential displacement of millions upon millions of warehouse workers and a skyrocketing productivity on the part of retailers. Then we move from warehousing into store design. In the retail industry today, most retailers operate on the basis of sort of an ABC format for stores. So Toronto, you get an A store. Vancouver, you get an A store. Timmins, you get a C store. They're basically three formats. AI could potentially give architects, designers, and retailers the insight to actually create completely unique stores by market, stores that actually fit the market in a very, very unique and tailored way. And the same would apply to websites. When you and I go on Amazon today, you and I are both seeing slightly different versions, perhaps, of exactly the same site. But if we think forward, you and I could be looking at completely different web presentations based on our own personal preferences, our purchase history, and that sort of thing. HR, think about hiring, the biases that people take into hiring decisions, and the potential for AI to extinguish a lot of that bias, process candidates much, much faster, and bring qualified people into the organization. Training, marketing, the list goes on and on and on. I think I don't want to waste the whole webinar talking about application, but literally every node of retail has some form of application just waiting for robust AI.
Well, it's anything that involves making a decision. Like, where am I going to put this? What am I going to buy?
Yeah. Or completing a routine task, a redundant task.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in retail.
Oh, yeah. A lot everywhere. I think, as I mentioned to you earlier, we were looking at a contract, and it was going to take hours and hours to draft it. And I thought, well, what would ChatGPT do here? And I fed in all the information, and 10 seconds later, there was a very serviceable draft. That probably saved us
gets you 70% of the way there.
Yeah, for sure. So how is this going to affect then the consumer? How the consumer chooses? We've seen the small things where Netflix will suggest, based on previous experience, here's a few ideas. But this is going to be far more robust, a million times more robust. It's going to change. What's the consumer of 5 years sitting in front of their computer or phone? How are they going to feel and see this?
Yeah. What's intriguing to me is the idea that right now, if you go to Google and you do a search for, the best pair of running shoes, you're going to get all kinds of stuff, right? You're going to get the lists out there that, are kind of the paid endorsement lists where people are saying the top 10 running shoes, and here's all the affiliate links to these running shoes. So somebody's making money off that. You're going to get all the paid sponsorship and ads at the top of the page, which are trying to sort of short circuit your journey. And so you're never quite certain as a consumer today, is what I'm looking at valid? Is it legitimate? Is it untainted by the wishes of and the dollars of advertisers? What's compelling to me is that we could be moving into a state where, as I said, each of us has sort of a personal assistant now that is able to comb through the internet and find facts that it believes are legitimate. That this is information that is not tainted by sponsorship or tainted by advertising. I've brought you back what I think are legitimate recommendations on the best thing for you to buy, which sets up an interesting dynamic, right? Because what are advertisers going to do in response? If all of a sudden every consumer out there is empowered with this presence that can cut through all that bullshit and give you the straight goods on something, how are advertisers going to respond to that? Are advertisers going to be employing AIs that can actually make their ads look less like ads, right? We get into that kind of mouse and mousetrap kind of scenario. So it's definitely going to influence how we consume, in the same way I think that the internet went a long way to that as well. Think back 30 years, 40 years. We had no information. We had literally nothing except what we were provided by the company or the brand. The internet was a huge breakthrough in terms of informing consumers and informing their consumption. I think we're on the precipice of another revolution like that. It'll be interesting to see how the advertising and marketing industries respond.
Well, that's, as you're saying that, I think, okay, I want to buy a pair of sneakers. So now I get all of those ads and I wade through them. But how will manufacturers and retailers reach their customers when you have an AI that's giving them one answer?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And an unfiltered, kind of unvarnished opinion. that is unbiased.
And it becomes the voice of God because it is unbiased, or it's perceived as unbiased. You walk into a store and you're sometimes you're not sure why they're suggesting this one, but the AI has no agenda. So you think they're suggesting this one thing.
Yeah.
So that sounds terrifying.
Which I know, because if you follow that line of thinking, it leads you to a place where all of a sudden you start to see, to some extent, you start to see free will evaporate, right? Mm-hmm. You start to see, as we have become, right? We say things are true because we saw them on the internet, right?
Well, I'm slightly older, and I remember the days when the internet first existed back in the 20s, and it was people would say things like, "It's going to be wonderful."
You mean the 2020s?
This is going to be fantastic because you'll only get the news that you're interested in. And I thought, well, no, that's the worst thing, because the news that I want to read is the stuff that I'm not interested in. That's how I find about new things, curiosity. Right. But this is actually going to say, no, you're only going to see the one product. You only those accidental interactions might disappear.
Right. Yeah, it's the death of serendipity, in other words, right? And you're absolutely right. I think to a large extent, social media has not expanded our view of the world or of society. It's narrowed it, right? Because it puts us more in proximity with people who think like us, act like us, and observe the same sorts of rituals and customs. We don't get better news than we got. We just get more news that we are prone to agree with or prone to be interested in. So you're absolutely right. And if we're not careful, AI could potentially have that same narrowing effect on the products and services that are available to us.
Okay, well, let's move away from that particular apocalypse and we'll find another one. We have kids, and I think with so many people, retail's their first independent income. It's their first job. It's where they first, they get a sense of worth. Where are those jobs going to go for kids?
Yeah.
What will they do when they're 16, 17, 18 years old?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, and already we've sort of seen a gutting of the front lines of retail, with self-checkout and certainly with e-commerce. So there are fewer of those jobs to begin with. Interestingly, though, and I may prove to be wrong about this, but I think that when we initially start talking about AI in retail, oftentimes we jump intellectually to the customer service engagement. Partly, I think, because it's just the most intriguing, right? The idea that a consumer will be talking to an AI, and that will undoubtedly happen. It's already happening. But I think that where we're really going to see a lot of traction is maybe in the less sexy aspects of the retail business, which really are around warehousing, distribution, logistics, back office stuff. I mean, how many accountants work at Walmart? How many lawyers work at Walmart? And how much of their work is, for the most part, non-dynamic, right? It's pretty much the same stuff every quarter, every year. If you're a lawyer, there are licenses that need to be renewed, and you have to keep on top of that stuff. All those jobs go away. So what could potentially, and those are not low-paying jobs either, right? Those are decent white-collar jobs. So what could wind up happening is that you may have an absolute hollowing of the middle. In effect, what we could be seeing with the advent of AI is the final end of what we used to call the middle class. Right? Because now, what do you need? You need executives who are basically taking the information that's being generated by AI within the organization, and they're using that to make decisions. And you have low-paid, unskilled workers at the other end who are still doing relatively dynamic work in customer service, because every customer is somewhat different, right? Their emotional state's a little different. Their needs are different. It's Wednesday, not Thursday. I mean, there's so many different things that go into those interactions. So to your question, in a direct way, it may not be the $10 an hour or the $12 an hour employee that is the ultimate and best deployment of AI. It may be the $150,000 a year creative person that works in your office, or the lawyer or the head of accounting that might go.
I have a friend who runs a 200 plus person company, and he put all of his financial information into AI, and he finds that he gets most reports so much faster, and he's using it actually to run the company.
Yeah, I mean, this is scary, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so Apocalypse 2. Let's see, no, that's right.
Let's keep going.
But look, okay, here's something that'll make us all feel.
I'll pick Apocalypses for 500, Alex.
But this will, okay, I want to know how AI is going to help us get rid of the most frustrating interaction on the face of the earth, your cell phone company. When you need help,
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. The amount of money that is spent on call centers is inordinate, right? It's an astronomical sum. We've tried offshoring it to reduce the cost of that, but AI could become the ultimate offshore of that. And not only that, but think about now, you call your cable company and you would prefer to speak Polish. You can easily. You will not be aggravated by the AI because it will not say things that would insult you or offend you or frustrate you, make you angry. It is quite conceivable that our interactions day to day, I mean, how often do we get furious with Google, right? We don't, right? Yeah. We generally speaking get what we need to satisfy our needs in the moment. And so it could definitely change the complexion of frustrating things like dealing with your cable company or your telco company.
So my experience with my cable telco company is going to be better. But what happens to the $2 billion worth of wages and tax revenue that is going to disappear?
Yeah.
Conceivably, they're not going to lower my bill.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, exactly. Well, there are a lot of different implications there. Let's think about that for a second. So if you're Walmart, right, you have 1 million people that work for you in the US, and I think the numbers are something like that. 1 million people work for Walmart. Now, all of a sudden, you implement AI, and let's say you take 25% of that workforce out. That's 250,000 people, not only that don't have jobs anymore and may find that they no longer can get an accounting job. They have to now think about actually either taking a store job at Walmart or working the drive-through window at Wendy's, right? So what does that do to society? But if you're in the government, and you're looking at this scenario, you just saw Walmart's productivity and profitability skyrocket as a consequence of that. But you also lost income tax dollars, right? Because now you have AI and robotics that are being employed. They're not paying income tax. So what happens to that? What happens to that money? What happens to that revenue from a government standpoint? So the implications are kind of interesting. It could be that governments say, look, wherever you implement AI or robotics to a threshold, predetermined threshold, we are going to look at a surcharge or a tax. So in essence, a robot may pay income taxes, because how on earth do you continue to fund society when you have people that are dropping off out of employment, no longer paying income tax, but they still require basic services, right? Roads, and fire departments, all those good things.
And the robot doesn't want a bigger house or waterfront property, but the money will still be there somewhere.
Right, and it'll probably be in the pockets of the Walton family, if we're being honest, right? And so we have to start. It's not just a business consideration. It really and truly is a societal consideration that we have to be making, both as citizens and as business people.
Right, and that's not, we've been talking about consumers, but if consumers don't have jobs, they won't be able to consume.
Right. And which is in a way, a part of the story of retail, over the past 40 years, sort of beginning in the 80s. We saw this marginalization of people that worked in retail, much of it at the hands of technology. Things like self-checkout, enterprise management systems that all of a sudden made, gathering information at store level much easier. We didn't need as many people. And so, it was companies like Walmart and other big box retailers that really took the role of a retail salesperson and downgraded it to the point where it could be today, in today's dollars, in the US, a $10.50 an hour job. But how do you still be a consumer when you're making $10.50? So in a sense, it was the big box phenomenon that kind of, they shot their own consumer.
Right. And then Amazon came along to shoot the big boxes.
Right.
Well, okay, Apocalypse 3. No. Listen, we got some questions from the audience. So let's see. Will AI miss the art or emotion of retail? For instance, in the HR example, a chatbot can read a resume, but it would miss the personality of the human candidate. So what should retailers do today or tomorrow to start gaining? Oh, these are 4 different questions. Okay,
It's a good one. And it's one of the things that I was talking about in a talk recently to an audience in Peru. The idea that we all know someone. Maybe it's us, at certain points in our life, we all know someone who was hired for a job that on paper, they didn't look like they were the right candidate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sure you do it all the time. Mm-hmm. You must meet people who, for whatever reason, you just think, I think they'd make a great speaker agent, or a great event coordinator, sort of counterintuitively. And they turn out to be wildly successful at it. So there is that. If we are using an AI that is sort of operating against very strict criteria, then we can make those kinds of mistakes, and the AI may not always be right. The benefit, I suppose, is if we do it properly, the AI actually learns over time. So it's taking into account some of those one-off success stories and trying to understand what was it about that individual, or is it about that individual that makes them successful?
Well, I can see that as a microcosm. Like 20 years ago, I would run a display ad, and the ad read, "Brilliant Misfits Wanted." Because I wanted serendipity. I wanted the unusual people. Because nobody grows up saying, I want to be a speaking agent. Nobody knows it exists. But now when people go on the websites, the job sites, they just key in a few different keywords, and our job doesn't even show up to most.
Right. And
there's no category for brilliant misfits.
Yeah.
And so which is unfortunate.
And the other thing we have to think about too is we're still in the phase as well where AI can be just wrong.
Yeah.
And like flat out, no question about it, wrong. And I'll tell you an interesting story about an experiment that I did. So I went to ChatGPT recently, and I started with a question. I said, can ChatGPT feel emotions? Right? Rhetorical question, but it was the starting point. Can ChatGPT feel emotions? And it said, ChatGPT is a generative AI program, doesn't feel emotions in the way that a human does. But we can infer different emotions from text and that sort of thing. Okay, great. I said, but if creativity is partly a factor of emotion, right? That when a great painter paints or a musician sits down at the piano, there's an emotional infusion into that piece of creative work, right? So I asked, if you don't have emotions, then how can ChatGPT actually create in the same way that a human can? ChatGPT came back and it said, well, I can't create things in the way that a human can because I don't have emotions, but I can still create completely original and compelling ideas. Completely original, unique ideas. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, Share with me. Completely original and unique idea. Go ahead. So it came back and it said, imagine a device that you could wear that would record your dreams. And later you could actually watch those dreams back and see what happened in your dreams. And I thought about it, and I actually did a couple of Google searches, and I said, that's not an original idea. I mean, science fiction authors have been talking about things like that for decades. Mm-hmm. And then ChatGPT did a really interesting thing. It said, I'm sorry, you are correct. This is not an original idea. I apologize, right? Now, harmless little experiment. Nobody got hurt. But imagine if that was a $10 million decision that I was asking ChatGPT to make. I mean, we were talking earlier about a lawyer that went into court in the US recently and took in all this case law that ChatGPT provided, none of which had any basis in reality. None of it even existed, right? And they got sanctioned by the court. So we also have to realize that this is not infallible. You know, this is, it can be corrupted and it can be wrong. And we have to account for that in our thinking.
But I was just shocked that it admitted that it was wrong and then apologized.
Yeah.
Which is, we'd like to hear more of that.
It was a nice apology. Yeah.
So this is a great question because I'm curious about the answer too. For someone running a company, what can they do with their own website to adopt AI more quickly? So they can invest more and they want to capture, invest more and want to capture more customers. Anyway, so how do you adapt or implement an AI strategy onto your existing website?
So I think the important thing, first of all, before you pick up the phone, I mean, there are a lot of obviously very qualified companies out there. I've been working very closely with the Microsoft team, not an endorsement, just a mention. I have been working with Microsoft quite a bit, and I know obviously Microsoft is all over this, right? Mm-hmm. And Microsoft has been circling the wagons around AI for literally decades. But before you get to that point, I think what you really have to do is interrogate your own goals. You know, I mean, who doesn't want more customers, right? Who doesn't want more profile as a brand or a business? Those things go without saying. I think what you really have to try and figure out is, you know, what is your story as a brand? How are you working to tell that story in a compelling way? How could AI potentially help to tell that story to a consumer for you? How could it better potentially customize that experience for a consumer? But you have to understand what experience it is that you're trying to customize in the first place. So I think the first step is really, you know, again, there are loads of companies out there that can work with you on achieving those goals with an implementation of AI. You have to understand what the goals are first.
Right. So you don't need an AI strategy, you need a business strategy, and AI is a tool to help you implement it.
Right. If you feel like your business strategy is rock solid, and you feel like your brand essence and your brand story is there and ready to go, you're in a good position. My experience has been that many companies, surprisingly, and some really large companies, don't really have a good handle on what their brand story is. You know, they're kind of resigned to the fact that they're in a commodity market and they're just trying to make it through another day, one promotion, one discount at a time. So get your story straight first, and then talk to somebody who can help you implement AI.
Okay. Now, what about for the employees who are in danger of being disrupted? What should they do? What can they do now?
Well, you know, I think it's sort of, it's an organizational question. I mean, for the individual, let's look at it from both standpoints. I think the first question is, what can organizations do to prepare for this, what seems like an inevitability, right? This is sort of like, we're sort of in the same place as pick your analogy, electricity, the internet, Napster? Are we in a Napster moment right now where it feels weird, but at some point this is just going to become mainstream and monetized? I think that organizations have to, first of all, work to truly understand what this technology is and what it is capable of doing and how. So that's going to mean onboarding expertise, whether that's outsourced expertise or whether you bring that in-house. Organizations should understand it. The second thing is to begin developing policy. I think that's going to be really important. How knowing what you know today, and policy is an evolving thing, but knowing what you know today, how are you going to use this weapon? Right? This weapon of potential mass destruction or mass salvation. How are you going to deploy it? What are the rules and guidelines and guardrails around that? The third thing is, let's start inventorying the job roles within the organization. Let's start understanding who are the people who are going to be most vulnerable by virtue of what they do to this technology. And can we use the time that we have between now and full implementation to actually start reskilling some of these people, upgrading their skills, transferring them to different kinds of work? What is the opportunity there? Communication, talking to your employee population about the advent of AI and what it could mean for the organization. That's all work that can be done now to prepare. I think if you are a line worker, I think the question is different. I think what you have to understand is that if your job is fundamentally a job around the analysis, communication, or manipulation of data, the egg timer just got turned to about 5 minutes, right? What you do is up to you. But I think we have to realize that there are going to be fundamentally in the retail industry, I think, two kinds of work. There's going to be extremely technical work, where it is the purview of data scientists and AI specialists and robotics specialists. And then there's going to be creative work, wildly creative work. If you don't fall into either of those two camps and you're not in the C-suite, your days are numbered in retail. And the sooner you internalize that and work with it, the better off you are going to be.
So people should be discussing this with their peers, with their friends. Now,
Absolutely.
What's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to our job? Because something is going to happen.
Absolutely.
It might not look in 5 years where we think it might, but we know something's going to be radically different.
Yeah, I don't think this is a train that we're going to be able to stop.
Right.
We can regulate it, we can legislate it, and hopefully we do. I feel right now the industry is moving faster than government, which should come as no huge surprise. Yeah. But I really think the government needs to act with urgency on this. But here's another interesting point that I think companies have to think forward to. You're a chess player, so you think in terms of end games, right? Mm-hmm. What's the end game off the first move? The end game, I think, here is that the companies that eventually win the war are not only going to be companies that have the best technical prowess, whether it applies to robotics, AI, or any other technology. They're going to need to have that arsenal of capability. But what do you do when you come to stalemate? What do you do when all of the major retailers are all basically using the same level of technology, right? Mm-hmm. And you can continue to try and push, and we need a better AI. We need something slightly more sophisticated than our competitor down the road, and that'll be a game of inches. But I think where the game of yards or meters is going to apply is on the creative side. Mm-hmm. Companies will win because they come up with fundamentally more interesting, exciting, and creative ideas. And what we know of AI right now is that it's very good at cobbling together ideas from the work of other people, right? And coming up with an iteration of it. But if we want things that are truly completely unique, never been seen, never been done, we're going to have to turn to human beings for that. But here's the rub. creativity is on the decline. Children are less creative today than they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And it's not an opinion, it's fact. This has been studied that kids at a young age today are less creative. Creativity is a dwindling resource that is going to become more and more precious. And companies are going to pay more and more a premium for people that have a true track record of creativity. So if it were me, I would say, if you really want to prepare for the battle ahead, and I hate to keep using war analogies, but as long as we're talking about apocalypses, why not? If you really want to prepare for the battle, what you should be doing is creating this kind of divergent culture where you have great science in-house and you have stockpiled the most creative and ingenious people you can find. So and you're paying today prices for them instead of 10-year from now prices.
So AI plus creativity is the key competitive advantage.
I believe so. Yeah.
See, so no more apocalypse. On that optimistic note, I think we've run out of time. I think we can go for another 6 hours. I hope everyone's enjoyed themselves. Check out the website and our social media feed for our next session. And if you've got any feedback, please email us. You can email me at dlavin@thelavinagency.com. Thanks for coming. Bye.